This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard and read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's introduce you to our panel of experts. They include former Representative Connie Wilson, easy for me to say, Chris Fitzsimon from NC Policy Watch, John Locke Foundation's Becki Gray, and Dan Blue III, the chairman of the Wake County Democratic Party and a political analyst. Well, we've got a good show for you this week, beginning with the Senate plan to cut gas taxes that looks a lot like a tax increase. We'll talk about how the new state budget is taking shape, and we'll discuss legislative overreach in the affairs of local governments. Let's get started. Even though it's early in the legislative session, our senators have shown they mean business. And what they are describing as a tax cut, the Senate wants to reduce North Carolina's gas tax from the current 37.5 cents per gallon to 35 cents. But in the process, they're going to change the formula used to calculate the tax and remove the current cap on the tax. Fiscal staff says the gas tax could raise as much as 39 cents a gallon in 2019. In addition, they've told the Department of Transportation to cut 500 employees by March 1st, or as soon as the gas tax bill is passed. Connie Wilson, here's the question. Is this a tax cut, a tax increase, or what?
I call it governing, because basically what's been going on for years is people have been talking about how we don't have enough revenues coming in, that people are buying cars that use less gas, and we need to do something. And finally they've thrown something out on the table that may have a little bit of a cut now, maybe a little bit of an increase later, but at least they're doing something to address a very important issue. It's a basic service of North Carolina that needs to be offered, and we're going to strangle ourselves on our own growth if we don't do something.
Dan, is that political speak for a tax increase?
It absolutely is. It's a warranted increase. You can't keep cutting things. You've got to make an investment in infrastructure at some point. But the clever wording of it is suspect. I think people see through it. They understand that it's a tax. The question is simply whether they're willing to pay that tax or not.
Becki, we were told, the Senate said, that they had polled this issue and that a large majority of people were in favor of this plan. Do we know what question they asked and how they asked it?
I haven't seen the poll. I don't know. I do understand that there were a lot of questions that were asked. There was some polling done to get what the public's view of it was. And to Connie's point, you know, and to Dan's point as well, I think that we would all agree that something needs to be done. I have a little bit of a concern that the first question out of the box is, well, should we increase taxes or should we not? I think we ought to be looking at other options. A lot of the highway money that is brought in is used for non-highway use. If we quit diverting that money, there's a transfer out of the Highway Trust Fund as well to the general fund. Yeah, $200 million a year. You know, let's put all of the highway money towards building and maintaining highways. Let's start there rather than coming out of the box with a tax increase.
Well, to that point, Chris, the gas tax has been about 70% of the monies that we've used to build roads. Does this indicate to you that the Senate is primarily putting the emphasis on gas taxes?
Well, no, I think they probably have other alternatives, but let's be honest about it. It's a tax increase, and Dan is right. It's a tax increase, and I think it's not necessarily the worst public policy in the world. What's frustrating is to hear people stand on the floor of the Senate and say this is not a tax increase when their own legislative staff who work for them say it's a tax increase. It's going to raise $1.2 billion. I don't disagree. We need to look for every dime and not transfer, but nobody's come up with a way to transfer. We're not transferring $1.2 billion. We still need more funding for highways. And the third thing, we've all sort of got around it. I think it's appalling how this was handled. They didn't introduce a bill and have hearings and listen to people and have DOT people come in and tax experts came in. They took a bill that was completely unrelated, has to do with the tax code, decoupling with the federal tax system. The last minute, nobody knew it. The governor apparently didn't know it. The House leadership didn't know it. They substituted a bill. They threw a tax increase in there. They didn't tell us the truth about it. And they loaded it up with other things that have nothing to do, that nobody's ever seen, like penalizing people who are trying to save their homes from foreclosure, like creating a new tax deduction for teachers, like changing college expense deductions. This is the kind of shenanigans we see in the midnight session of the last night, and we're doing it on a bill that's about one of the most important issues facing North Carolina. Well, it's outrageous.
This business about cutting 500 employees, Connie, where did that come from? I mean, where did they reach that number? How did they decide on 500 employees and how they're going to make it work.
I don't know how they came up with 500 employees, but I do know that there's been a focus from this General Assembly to privatize as much of DOT as they can. And you can see there's been a dramatic drop in DOT
and they
employees.
say DOT has been dragging their feet in getting it done.
And this may be part of that response, but they have been doing that.
It's a little slap in the face of the governor, though. They're going to cut 500 jobs out of the administration of a governor of their own party, and he didn't know about it, and he's worried about it, and he said that he thinks it's probably not a good idea.
So next week, this bill, Becki, goes to the floor of the House, and we're hearing all kinds of rumblings about maybe some changes might be made in it. Do we know what they might be?
Well, some things that they're talking about is perhaps in addition to the floor, putting a ceiling in it so that taxpayers will know, so there will be some budget predictability. So the tax could not go below 35 cents, but put a ceiling on it so it couldn't go above a certain amount too. Again, to provide some predictability.
But Dan, if they do that, how are they going to raise the $1.2 billion that the senators have been saying that this new tax is going to generate?
I think they'll put in a cap to make it look good, but at some point they'll have to come back and take the cap off. They need the money.
Well, they also may look at some additional fees and permitting, licensing, and those kind of things for, again, kind of a user fee, if you will. And something else that the General Assembly's been talking about for several years is using toll roads. Yeah. And again, that's not anybody's favorite way to do it, but, you know, Tom, I've heard you say,
I did a column
everybody wants better roads, nobody wants to pay for it.
Well, not only that, but I did a column last week saying we were going to have to put tolls in this mix, and I got tarred and feathered for it. If you like NC Spin and you want more, be sure to visit our website, ncspin.com, or NC Spin on Facebook. We have exclusive video footage you can't get anywhere else. Plus, you can read perspectives from opinion leaders across our state. Get more balanced debate from the Old North State on ncspin.com or NC Spin on Facebook or at NC Spin Tweets. When we come back, we're going to look at the state budget.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
Phones are getting smarter, cars more efficient, TVs bigger and more stunning. Imagine the same innovation from agriculture. Meet the Plant Sciences Initiative at NC State, a proposed state-of-the-art research complex where world-class researchers will tackle agriculture's toughest challenges, like feeding the world's rapidly growing population while preserving natural resources for future generations. Join Farm Bureau and NC State in moving North Carolina to the forefront of ag research in the world. Visit keepaggrowing.org.
The cost of everything has gone up dramatically over the last 75 years. With one exception, keeping electricity affordable. That's the power of your co-op membership. Learn more at togetherwesave.com.
North Carolina's Touchstone Energy Cooperatives, looking out for you.
Every year, North Carolina patients undergo 635,000 same-day surgeries. 72% of these surgeries are performed in our highest-cost hospital facilities, adding as much as $2,000 to every procedure. The state's outdated Certificate of Need law prevents competition from lower-cost, higher-quality same-day surgery centers, inflating healthcare costs and limiting patient choice. Tell state lawmakers it's time to lower healthcare costs now. It's time to make a simple fix to an outdated law, increasing patient choice and lowering healthcare costs now. You can help. Visit reformconnow.com and tell lawmakers it's time for a simple fix to an outdated law. It's time to lower healthcare costs now.
We now return to NC Spin.
As lawmakers get down to the business of crafting a new budget for the next 2 years, they got to know how much revenue to expect. Recent reports from their staff indicates the current year's budget that ends June 30th will be as much as $271 million short of projections, primarily because wages haven't grown as much and as had been forecast. Assuming no more tax changes, they were told that next year's budget should have a projected surplus of about $550 million. Chris, by the time they factor in modest enrollment growth for Medicaid, enrollment growth in public schools and universities, increases in costs for the state health plan and the raise for starting teachers that they've already passed, they've eaten up almost all this projected surplus. What does it tell you about next year's budget?
Well, I think it tells you two things. First of all, we've changed the way, and it sounds like inside baseball, people don't keep up with it every day, but they've changed the way the budget is prepared. It used to be most of those things you mentioned would have been wrapped up in the base, something called the base budget, and they're built in. The General Assembly changed all that. So now we have to debate all those things, but I think they have to fund all those things, enrollment increases, Medicaid growth, and so forth. So it's really not correct to say there's a surplus. What it's correct to say is that they're forecasting the economy to have modest growth next year. That's the money that's going to be available to pay to keep state services at the same level they are now, to pay for new kids, to pay for increased Medicaid costs. So we really don't have a surplus. We have all that money accounted for. What it says about the budget is there's very little left for other priorities. For example, the crisis in courts funding that Supreme Court Chief Justice Mark Martin has talked about. Governor McCrory last year begged the General Assembly for money. They actually cut court technology funding. There's a lot of other needs. It's going to be a very tight year.
But Becki, when they were challenged about all of this and asked questions about it, some of the legislative budget leaders said, wait a minute. When you stop and put this in perspective of where we were when we first took over state government, and even with the projection of 271 million shortfall, we're still a lot farther ahead than we were, and we've got the surpluses that we'd be able to pay this off. You agree with them?
Sure. Yeah, I do. And also we're seeing a recovering economy, which is another thing that is significant with a lot of the reforms that they've put into place with tax reform, regulatory reform, a different way that we pay for infrastructure, education reform, all those kind of things. North Carolina's economy is recovering, which is very good news moving forward.
So, Becki, what happens if this $550 million surplus that they're projecting is wrong? What goes on then? I mean, excuse me, Connie, what happens if it's wrong?
Us Republican women, we all look alike, don't we, Tom? Want to ask that question
I'm
again?
listening and thinking at the same time. This is hard for me.
No.
We've had snow this week.
Okay.
All right. So what happens if the $550 million projection doesn't show up, doesn't turn out?
Well, you know, they've got plenty of time to plan. As has been mentioned, they've come so far along. It used to be there was a several hundred million Medicaid surprise every year. That's gone away. They've got control over stuff. It's taken a few years, but things have really stabilized. And that's good governance.
Well, Tom, too, you know, the other piece of this, when you talk about the budget and
you
talk
talk
about
Becki?
spending, right, I'm the other one, the other woman on tonight. But when you talk about spending and you talk about the budget, the spending part is one of it, or the revenue is one part of it. The spending part is another, and there's still plenty of room for additional spending reforms that we'll see, along with the tax cuts that have occurred.
But Dan, does this mean not to expect any more teacher pay increases, not to expect any more state employee increases, not to expect any additional expenses on Medicaid reform or anything like that?
It's really difficult to say what to expect. I go back to what Chris said. You can't call this a surplus. You're getting paid on Monday, but you got bills due on Tuesday. It's an issue of timing at best. With all due respect, I think they might be making some improvements, but one of the things they have to improve upon is making this budget process more transparent. And it's not transparent when you're using language that doesn't accurately describe what it is, because then you set expectations improperly. We don't know what's in that budget. We don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. Let's make sure that we're talking about it in terms that people understand.
Bottom line, is it likely we're going to have to see some more budget cuts next year?
I think we're going to see additional spending reforms, and I think that that is a healthy thing. You know, all of this discussion is assuming that the level of government that we have currently today is the appropriate and the correct level. I would argue that we still need to make some spending reforms.
The answer is yes, they want to see more budget cuts.
There's going to be a focus on what's working and what's not working. And if something's working, at what level is it working? And that's the new focus.
All right, stay tuned. We'll find out about budget reforms or cuts, whichever it may happen to be. After these messages, legislative overreach? What is it?
NC Spin will return after these messages.
Where do you go when you need to know? ANC makes it easy for you to get the information you need to make well-informed public policy decisions. Our members are industry leaders who are ready to share their industry-specific insights with you. Want to hear both sides of the story? ANC members can tell you. Just use the ANC member directory as your guide or call us directly. ANC members have the knowledge, expertise, and perspective you need to create public policies that are good for North Carolina. We are ready for your call.
Medicaid system is not a perfect system. There are things that could be changed, but there's a lot that's going well with the system. Community Care of North Carolina is in place. It's a team of nurses, advisors, caregivers who help us out. We want to call and say, look, I've got Miss So-and-so here. She needs to have her weight checked each day because she's got congestive heart failure. Can you send one of those monitors out to the house and keep an eye on this and let me know if her weight goes up too much, because if it does, she's retaining fluid and she's going to be back in the hospital. We work together with them. That's a great system. It saves a lot of money. It's proven to work. We're not opposed to changing the things that need to be changed, but let's not throw out everything that we worked for the past 15 to 20 years.
North Carolina's Family Physicians supports Medicaid reform that builds on our state's foundation of medical homes.
OurNCHealthcare.com.
Does your North Carolina business or organization have a story to tell? I'm Richard Campbell, and at Carolina Broadcasting and Publishing, we help tell stories that connect you to the people who will respond. We take the time to understand our clients' needs and what makes them unique. We craft their stories through the efficient use of words, images, and videos that resonate with their desired audience. We also know that a good story is incomplete without a call to action. On video, on air, online, and in print, from concept to final production, no one can help tell your story more effectively or affordably than we can. For special introductory offers, visit carolinabroadcasting.com or call 919-832-1416. Again, that's carolinabroadcasting.com. Let us help tell your story today.
We now return to NC Spin.
For decades, North Carolina leaders have complained about federal overreach or interference in things affecting North Carolina. But overreach doesn't seem to be a problem when it comes to their dealings with local governments. First, we saw them attempt to take the Asheville water system from the city of Asheville. Then they tried to take Charlotte Douglas Airport away from the city of Charlotte. They eliminated the privilege taxes and changed how local governments could charge for sales taxes. Now they want to reconfigure the number of Greensboro council members and the way the voters select them. Dan, in every instance that I just cited, the city governments we mentioned are controlled by Democrats. Is that just a coincidence, or is this truly legislative overreach?
I don't know if it's a coincidence, but it's certainly overreach. Generally, you hear about this in the context of annexation. In the last year or so, as you said, we've mentioned airports, water systems. In Wake County, we've looked at the school board districts being reconfigured and gerrymandered to try to change the numbers. People are going to gravitate towards where they think the levers of power are, and it's going up. It's going out of the cities and municipalities to the General Assembly, and that's unfortunate.
In some instances, Connie, in fact, Nelson Dollar, who's one of the House leaders, says that part of the reason why they're taking some of these actions is that local leaders have just exceeded their authority. If so, do we know some instances of it?
I do not know of specific instances, but in North Carolina, the General Assembly can basically tell cities and counties what your district looks like. They have very limited powers, and this General Assembly is exercising them. When the Democrats were in control in the legislature and these local municipalities were controlled by Democrats, there was a consistency in philosophy, and now there's a difference, and the General Assembly is exercising
Becki,
that.
Following up on what Connie is saying, if that is in fact the case, A, why do we either have local elections, why do we have local elected officials, or B, why don't we have home rule?
Well, we don't in North Carolina.
I know.
Some states do, North Carolina doesn't. And so all of the cities and the municipalities are creatures of state government. And those local governments only have the authority that the General Assembly grants to them. So it's a little bit different dynamic than you have at other states. And in a lot of cases, the General Assembly looks at those. I think the privilege tax is a good example of that. There were gross abuses of that privilege tax. There was an inequity in the the way that those privilege taxes were imposed.
Yeah.
And so the General Assembly stepped in to try to fix that, to make that equitable, to fix a wrong that had been created by local governments.
But just to say that the fact that the General Assembly has the authority, just because something is allowable under the Constitution doesn't make it right. And let's put the privilege tax aside. There's no reason for the General Assembly to redraw the city council districts in Greensboro, or come into Wake County and redraw the lines, or draw the Guilford County School Board lines. This is just a pure, I think, abuse of power, and they want to control everything. The same Republicans who are running the General Assembly now 10 or 15 years ago said every single day on the House and Senate floor that local governments know best. Let's let the people of Greensboro decide. Let's let the people of Charlotte decide. Now they want the legislators in Raleigh to decide for the people in Greensboro, for the people in Charlotte, and I think it's outrageous.
Dan, one of the issues that is involved in these discussions is the issues of eminent domain, in which municipalities, they say, have condemned property for use by private entities, and they want to do away with that. But hasn't the state effectively done that themselves?
They're getting closer, and there's a Supreme Court case, I think, that's weighing in on the subject matter as well. It's a difficult conversation to have. It's a sticky, a slippery slope. When you talk to municipalities that are impacted by eminent domain decisions, you understand the need and desire, but at the same time, you've got to respect property rights.
And the same thing is true, Connie, with the extraterritorial jurisdiction requirements, and cities saying that they need to be able to control some of the building and permitting that goes on outside their limits. That's exactly right,
but those same people they want to control, they don't have the right to vote. I mean, they're really there and they're stuck. Folk have power over them, and they really have no say-so.
So what we've got is relationship problems between the legislature and our local governments in North Carolina. Becki, do you see anything that's going to cause that to get better?
I'm not sure that it's a problem as much as it is oversight and accountability.
I don't think that's a bad thing. City council races, that has nothing to do with accountability.
To the ETJ questions and some of those, there have been what people feel like are real serious property violations but done by local governments, that the General Assembly has stepped in to stop those kind of things.
So my question is, do we see anything that's possibly going to cause these relationships to get any better?
Well, I guess they could redistrict every city until there's a majority of Republicans on the city council, and then would probably improve the relationship.
I don't know. Republicans don't fight a lot. That's no guarantee.
Yeah, but
they don't get along with each other too well either.
There has been a change in the political makeup of county commissions. Going back to the 1970s, they were controlled by Democrats. Beginning in 2010, it flipped to about a 50-50. 50 counties were controlled by Republicans, 50 Democrats, and it's become more Republican. So that dynamic is going on as well.
I think we just want to see them play well together. After these messages, we're going to get the panel to tell us something we don't know.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
Hi, I'm Linda Loveland. I want the best for my kids. Feeding them foods they like within my budget is a priority. But what do we really know about these foods? North Carolina farmers and food experts give you a website to find it all. FeedTheDialogueNC.com, a place where moms like you and me can learn more about the foods we eat and the farmers that feed us. Check it out. Add your input and help feed the dialogue. Let's talk food at FeedTheDialogueNC.com.
Nobody ever imagined a mammogram machine being subject to CON law. If I want to invest our business dollars into technology that I think is going to benefit my patients, my customers, we should be able to do that. I think it's time to take a law that was intended to protect the citizens of North Carolina and now is harming them and change it. I'm Dr. Bruce Schroeder, and I support CON reform.
Visit reformconnow.com.
Medicaid system is not a perfect system. There are things that could be changed, but there's a lot that's going well with the system. Community Care of North Carolina is in place. It's a team of nurses, advisors, caregivers who help us out. We want to call and say, look, I've got Miss So-and-so here. She needs to have her weight checked each day because she's got congestive heart failure. Can you send one of those monitors out to the house and keep an eye on this and let me know if her weight goes up too much, because if it does, she's retaining fluid and she's going to be back in the hospital. We work together with them. That's a great system. It saves a lot of money. It's proven to work. We're not opposed to changing the things that need to be changed, but let's not throw out everything that we worked for the past 15 to 20 years.
North Carolina's Family Physicians supports Medicaid reform that builds on our state's foundation of medical homes. OurNCHealthcare.com.
We now return to NC Spin.
Okay, here's one of our favorite parts of the show when we ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. Becki, Gray, start with you.
Tom, there was a significant decision that came down this week from the Court of Appeals that has to do with property rights. It has to do with the MAP Act in North Carolina, where DOT can go out and condemn property for road right-of-ways and really tie up that land for 15, 16, 17 years. It's a group of property owners in Winston-Salem who had filed a lawsuit, and again, a Court of Appeals decision today came down in favor of those plaintiffs. Again, this is a huge victory for property rights advocates in North Carolina.
Dan Blue, tell us something we don't know.
I was reading an article this week about the UNC Board of Governors closing down the UNC Center on Poverty. It's an interesting thing because 18% of North Carolinians live in poverty. Of those, about 25% are children, and of those children, 40% are children of color. Some say that it's political payback for a very outspoken director of that center. I'm hoping, though, that the conversation will actually shift to the underlying problems, that we can have a conversation on poverty instead of on the role of education in the centers and the political discourse that's going on.
Connie Wilson, tell us something we don't know.
There's a commission called the Rules Review Commission, and about 3 years ago it was asked to approve rules for something called the medical fee schedule for all workers' comp cases out there. And they denied that rule because they said it wasn't statutory. Because of their decision, which was a very important decision, there's been a compromise reached with all stakeholders, hospitals, doctors, insurance carriers, employers across the state. It's going to save the system hundreds of millions of dollars, and you've never heard about it. But everybody got down together, worked out a compromise, and hopefully this week it's approved by the Rules Review Commission.
Chris, tell us something we don't know.
During his State of the State speech, and by the way, I think the governor's still talking, still giving that speech, he said that 40%, we have a 40% fraud and abuse rate in workers' compensation on how it affects state employees, and then he recommended some policy ideas to help fix that, and everybody was puzzled trying to figure out where that come from. Now we know that that came from an offhanded comment between the state personnel director, Neil Alexander, and an unidentified third-party vendor. There was no analysis done, no review of any data. The governor then put it in a speech and said, our examination of the data has found a 40% fraud rate. No expert thinks there's anywhere near that. It raises alarms about how the governor's office actually works.
All right, I've got one this week. You may have noticed my tie, orange and black. Those are the school colors for Campbell University. Recently, I was asked to go and appear at Founders Day at Campbell in Buies Creek. Along with the Campbell family, they unveiled a new statue, a bronze statue of the founder of Campbell, James Archibald Campbell, Jim Arch as he was called, who was my great-grandfather. It was a proud day to be a Campbell in North Carolina. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback and read our weekly columns. Visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. And we hope you'll join us next week when we'll have more balanced debate for the Old North State. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Join us next week and get the spin on issues facing our state.